All right, let's just dive right into it. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're actually going to skip our usual agenda entirely because I want to plunge you straight onto the cold, dark railway tracks of 1960s Britain. We're looking at the Great Train Robbery and the evolution of British security. This is a story of ambition, greed, and a heist so unbelievably bold it completely transformed an entire nation's approach to law enforcement.
Picture this. It's August 8th, 1963. Imagine you're driving a massive locomotive, speeding through the dead of night in the English countryside. Right behind you, the train cars are stuffed with bags filled with millions of pounds in cash. And here's the kicker. There are no armed guards. There are zero sophisticated security systems. You're just totally unaware that, hidden in the darkness just ahead, a highly organized gang of criminals is waiting patiently for you.
You're basically heading straight into a trap, which brings us to a seemingly impossible question. How exactly do you rob a moving train? We aren't just looking at a simple smash and grab today. No, we're looking at an absolute masterclass in exploiting outdated systems. This was a crime that shocked Britain, embarrassed the police, and ultimately forced the entire country to wake up to its own glaring vulnerabilities.
So let's get into Section 1, Executing the Heist.
The target was the Glasgow to London Royal Mail train, famously known as the Up Special. Now, in the early 1960s, Britain was modernizing rapidly, but security? Well, it just hadn't kept pace. Banks regularly used this specific, entirely unprotected train to move vast sums of cash across the country every single night. To an experienced criminal network, this wasn't just a train. It was an irresistible, rolling bank vault.
The gang's operational playbook was incredibly precise. First, they targeted a railway signal, physically altering it from green to red to force the driver to halt. Then, springing from the darkness, they completely overwhelmed the train crew. Now, while their goal was strictly money, things did get violent. The train drivers suffered severe injuries, a tragic fact that later generated enormous public sympathy for them. After stopping the train, they faced a major hurdle. The train was way too long. They needed to move only the valuable section containing the cash to their drop point. But the gang struggled to operate the complex locomotive themselves. As precious minutes ticked by, they actually had to force a captured railway employee to help them drive it. Finally, they swiftly unloaded the cash into waiting vehicles and vanished before the police could ever arrive.
The sheer scale of the payday was staggering, 2.6 million pounds, and they pulled this off in less than an hour. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is when you adjust that amount for inflation today, we're talking about tens of millions of pounds. It was one of the largest cash robberies in British history. They literally achieved the impossible.
Moving on to Section 2, Planning the Impossible. You don't just wake up and pull something like this off. This level of success required meticulous, almost obsessive preparation by these experienced criminals. In month 1, they obsessively studied railway schedules and remote routes in Buckinghamshire to find an isolated spot with limited police presence. By month 2, they were actively monitoring security and communication procedures to understand exactly how the mail staff operated. And in month 3, they rented a secret hideout called Leather Slade Farm, where they stored equipment, prepped vehicles, and rehearsed the operation over and over and over again. Every single second was mapped out.
We have this really powerful quote from our source material that perfectly captures the stakes. The leaders understood one thing. This crime required precision. One mistake could destroy the entire plan. This wasn't a game. It was a high-stakes gamble where absolute perfection was the literal baseline requirement for success.
Which brings us to Section 3, The Fatal Mistake.
The contrast here is just staggering. On one hand, you have the execution of the perfect crime. The initial getaway was flawless. The police had virtually no immediate leads. Witnesses saw nothing in the dark, and the gang simply vanished into the night. But, on the other hand, you have their fatal mistake, the disastrous decision to lay low and celebrate at their hideout, Leather Slade Farm.
Their actions at the farm were, frankly, a masterclass in carelessness. Assuming they were perfectly hidden, they just relaxed. They spent time together, they played games, ate meals, and in doing so left their fingerprints absolutely everywhere. It was a literal treasure trove of mundane, careless errors just waiting for the place.
Let's look at Section 4, the fingerprint failure. You really have to remember, in 1963, fingerprint identification was just becoming this incredibly powerful investigative tool. The careless biological evidence left at the farm provided detectives with exactly what they needed.
The sheer volume of fingerprints left behind forced detectives to mobilize on an unprecedented scale, proving once and for all that biological markers could reliably track down sprawling criminal networks. In fact, it completely standardized how police databases operated moving forward. It forced agencies to systematically cross-reference prints rather than relying on manual, isolated checks. Because of this monumental fingerprint failure, arrests happened rapidly, and the sentences handed down by the courts? Shocking. Some up to 30 years in prison. The government was sending a very clear message. Organized crime was going to be destroyed by modern forensic investigation.
And that leads us to Section 5, upgrading Britain's security.
The heist exposed some truly glaring vulnerabilities: completely unprotected cash trains, outdated police coordination, and totally ignored corporate system weaknesses. But these very failures forced immediate massive upgrades. Banks completely overhauled their transport methods. The days of casually moving unguarded millions on trains were officially over. Law enforcement leveled up their forensic procedures, doubling down on the evidence collection techniques and database standardizations that caught the gang in the first place. And corporations modernized their security, finally recognizing the vulnerabilities they had blindly ignored for years. This one single night literally forced a nation to modernize how it moved its money and investigated its crimes.
Finally, Section 6, the enduring legend.
The legacy of the robbery left a massive cultural footprint. First off, you have Ronnie Biggs, one of the robbers who wasn't even the mastermind, escaping prison, fleeing abroad, and somehow transforming into an international celebrity and folk anti-hero. Then you have the enduring mystery of the missing money. Significant amounts of that £2.6 million were simply never recovered, which sparked endless speculation of buried loot. And of course, there are the countless books, documentaries, and films that continue to blur the line between the very real victims of this crime and the Hollywood-style narrative of a brilliant, daring heist.
So, more than half a century later, a provocative question remains. Are we fascinated by how they robbed the train, or why we secretly want them to get away with it? This crime combines suspense, meticulous planning, high risk, and an enduring mystery. It exposed a nation's flaws and quite literally forced it into the modern era of security and forensics. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning and keep learning.